Well, hello, people. Whoever gets to see this podcast will probably get to, well, if you don't get to see it, you will actually get the chance to do so later on. My name is Marcelo Palermo. I'm an international correspondent specializing in war and combat and also in international conflict. So I decided to go with some interesting facts about the actual very poignant Russian-Ukrainian conflict. And of course, I'm going to try to do it from as an objective perspective as is possible. This report is actually going to be then sent and uploaded by different news platforms. I decided to do it in Facebook in English. And of course, si alguien tiene preguntas en castellano, español, u otro idioma, por favor háganmelas y las voy a responder con mucho gusto. You guys have questions in other languages, just such as, I don't know, Spanish, Italian, German, Portuguese, French. I will try to respond. But we're going to move forward in English. It's very important for you all to know that you're listening to somebody who has been in war zones, who has been analyzing international conflict for over 20 years. And that gives me a bit of an authority to actually bring into some historic and anthropological factors. As a matter of fact, I am a professional war and combat correspondent. I am an international conflict correspondent, and I am a social anthropologist. So I've been around there now and then, and I have a little bit of an edge to analyze this kind of conflicts. Well, first of all, we need to understand all the perspectives, because there's one thing that is clear, it is true. And please let me just put this back on track. Just 1 second. I'm sorry, I'm having a little problem with my stand. Let me just put the stand back in place, and we're going to be back on track right away. Just a little bit. There we go. I got my stand in proper place. But well, first of all, you need to understand that when you talk about Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, you talk about pretty much the same place. Why is that? Because those countries, the populations, the ethnic groups are comprised, those peoples are comprised of the same ethnic groups. We're talking about Vikings, Finnish Vikings. We're talking about Rus people. The Rus people are the ones who gave the name to Belarus and Russia. And all those people, actually, and Slavic people as well, that are from those different places. Now, with the expansion of the Soviet Union since the 1920s, all the way to, of course, until its collapse in 1989, many other ethnic groups have been pitching in or adding up into the vast and big, broad land that the Soviet republics actually adding up to the populations that the Soviet republics will contribute to the Soviet Union. As a matter of fact, some people talks about Russia, in the 80s, in the 70s, 60s, all the way from the 20s to 1989. And the fact is, there was no such thing as Russia. Russia was the most powerful and the biggest country of the Soviet republics, but Russia was another Soviet republic. As a matter of fact, one of the leaders of the Soviet Republic, Joseph Stalin, or Joseph Dugashvili, or Joseph Kova, as Stalin, one of the most notorious and most nefarious leaders of the Soviet Union, was known, and the second one, after Lenin died in the 1920s, that is, he was from Georgia. Georgia is one of those little satellite republics of what will become to be the Soviet Union, or the Soviet Union, or Soviet republics. Another one of those republics, or another one of those states, was Ukraine, which, by the way, if you have to translate the word Ukraine to Russia, to the Russian language, or to the Rus language, Ukraine means region, area, a sector. The region, that was a region incorporated into the Soviet Union when, of course, the alliance of Soviet republics and satellite republics was formed back in 1922. That was when actually Ukraine was incorporated. And you got a lot of things. For example, when you talk about the history of the Rus, you got to go back to the 9th century. The Rus people, Rus the Kiev, or Rus of Kiev, was founded and established in 1882 AD, Anno Domini. So it's 1882 years after Christ. We're talking about this because it's very important to understand the projected similarities of all these peoples. They were called the Kievan Rus or Kievan Rus. And the capital was the place that is today under siege by Putin's, the totalitarian regime or the autocratic regime of Russia, Putin's regime, Putin's army. We're talking about Kiev, the capital of the actual country of Ukraine. So this is the thing. Ukraine was a poignant and strong part of the Kievan Rus people back in 1882 AD. And this state, this government, this conglomerate of territories that was an early feudal monarchy, because we're talking about the Middle Ages. So it was a monarchy. We're talking about kings and queens. We're talking about monarchs, rulers, and feudal lords ruling lands. Went all the way since 1882 to 1240 to 1240 after Christ. We're talking here roughly like almost 300 years before the discovering of the Americas by the Spaniards, conquistadors. They arrived to what eventually will be known as the Americas. Of course, it was a continent that already had people, lots of peoples, native peoples, people that migrated there in ancient times. But that's another story. We're going to talk about the Kievan Rus people. The Kievan Rus people actually had a common language, and that language was Ukrainian. The language that is primarily spoken today in Ukraine. The second language, is pretty much at pair with it, is Russian, a language that came from Kievan Rus, the Rus languages, which are languages that actually come from, historically, from the Greek peoples or populations. They're derivations, right? Derivatives. Evolving languages that came from the ancient Greeks peoples and their languages too, and the Greek language eventually derived into different languages. And the Rus language or Russian language is the one of those languages, and a language that is spoken vastly all through the Russian country. The Russian Federation of Russian country today is still a humongous country, a big country, mostly covered by the Siberian desert. But of course, it lost lots of power back in between 1989 and 1991 when the dissolution of the Soviet Union took place. Up until then, and since 1922, Ukraine was a territory of the Soviet Union, mostly controlled by Moscow, because Moscow was the main capital of the Soviet Union and the capital of Russia. But again, it is a little bit of a mistake to call the Soviet Union Russia, because out of all fairness, Russia was a conglomerate of republics, a conglomerate of countries. And you have to understand that the Soviet Union was a conglomerate of countries, and Russia was part of the Soviet Union. Although the most powerful, the most extensive of all of those countries, it was still part of it. So if you will go, as I did, and travel to Russia, even in the late 90s and early 2000s, you will have lots of people that will find it hard for you to say, well, how was Russia before 1991? Because it would say there was no such thing as Russia back then, or you can talk about Russia as one of the countries of the Soviet Union, or the Union of Social Soviet Republics. USSR, as we know it in English, la Unión de Repúblicas Socialistas Soviéticas in castellano español. Well, we can go through other languages. So this is the thing. Nowadays we have a nefarious thing going on. Putin decided to go into Ukraine. He put history on his side and unilaterally decided to go in. making a narrative, trying to topple the government that is all there right now. Lukashenko. We're gonna go with what's going on right now over there. Lukashenko is the president of Belarus, and Belarus, they have a dictator, probably the only plain dictatorship in Europe. And that president, that guy, is actually one of the few that supports, well, one of those who are on the side of Putin, because it's benefited by Russia having extended dominion over territories that they feel under threat by the NATO. But NATO also has to keep a barrier there, so Russia doesn't cross a border and doesn't decide to move forward towards other parts and where, a war of bigger scale, like probably Third World War, could erupt. That is if Russia actually, Putin decides to move forward with its army, keep on rolling over Ukraine, and eventually get to one of the countries, or attack by chance or on purpose any of the countries that are parts of the NATO alliance or North Atlantic Treaty of Defense. That will make that every single other country, including us, United States of America, belonging to the NATO treaty, will have to actually jump into it and go to war against Russia. So the pieces of this very delicate chess table set out right now are in a delicate state. Putin knows it. There's many things at stake here, and not only on the side of Putin, but also on the side of the Western powers or countries of the European Union and of NATO. The thing again is, this is a claim that Vladimir Putin makes. He was, remember, a prominent officer of KGB. He was a director of the KGB and eventually became a president almost for life, we can say, because he's been ruling in and out of Russia from the late 1990s, and he's still in power. He was for a brief period leading from behind or under the shadows, but he's now back on top of it, and for a while he has been. And his thing is that he always tells the Western world that nobody understands how Russian politics or Russian culture works, which I think is not the case. And of course, it's a good excuse for him to keep on doing things that are nefarious and just plain wrong. For example, in this case, the claim he makes is that, okay, we are somehow the same people. Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, especially those three countries. There are many more that were included in the Soviet Union, but when you go back in history, all the way back to the 9th century, the Ukrainian people, the Belarusian people, and the Rus people, the Russians, the Russian Federation did not exist back then yet, as we know it, not the Russian Empire as we knew it afterwards with the Tsars, Peter I, and etc., all the way to the Romanovs in the early part of the 20th century. I mean, it didn't exist back then, but these people were together, and the main language, the official language of the Kievan Rus people was Ukrainian, the language that is mostly today an official language of Ukraine. Today, Ukraine is a democracy. Back in 1991, when the Soviet Union was dissolved, Ukraine decided to go as a democratic country, something that did not happen with Belarus. Belarus has Lukashenko, a leader, a totalitarian leader who's a dictator, and he prides himself of being probably arguably one of the last dictators of Europe, if not the last, actually. And of course, he's an ally with the autocracy that Putin runs in Russia, and he gets great benefits. He gets greatly benefited, from that alliance. But at the same time, he's opposed, he's a nemesis to all the Western powers and all the NATO allies. So the problem now is that Putin decided to go full-blown bananas, to scale up things and invade Ukraine. He says that his intention is to topple the actual government, a democratic government, and put a government that is support a government that is more Russian-friendly. So the things we have to remember is that back in 2014, he took Crimea from Ukraine. Crimea is, Crimea's population mostly are Russian-speaking people. So according to Putin, they're more prone to, or more likely, they wanted more to be Russian than to be Ukrainian, and that's debatable because you never know when they present you facts from a autocratic state. They're mostly going to be manipulated. So Putin will always build his own narrative, and what he would like to do now is to see if he can move forward and turn Ukraine into a pro-Russian government. Why does he want to do this? It's very simple. Very, very simple. Because Ukraine is being now under scrutiny to become a full active member of NATO. And for Putin to have a next door neighbor such as Ukraine being a full-blown member, a full active member of NATO, for him, for Putin, its main enemy, and let's be fair, for NATO, Putin is pretty much right now the biggest threat, especially with this late move. That for him, for Putin, is unacceptable. He thinks that Russia will be under siege, and that's why he proceeds the way he proceeds. That's why he moves forward the way he moves forward. Now, what's and how we can actually, or the Western world can actually deal with this more unhinged, more aggressive version of Putin that went from threats to active, full-blown war state of mind and projected into already getting into a war. And it is already into a war because there is a war right now, make no mistake. I mean, anybody who's thinking about something that can go other way will be wrong. Putin is right now commanding a war against Ukraine with a clear objective to topple this regime. The primary goal is to destroy the government and to have a pro-Russian government, kind of a puppet government, installed in Ukraine. Now the thing is, Ukraine ever since 1991 and the official dissolution of the Soviet Union, they decided to be a democratic country, a country that will be ruled the way the Western countries are. Not without minor problems. They had cases of corruption. They had cases of shady governments. And that's why they couldn't be fully accepted to be a full member or full active member of NATO before. And they haven't been yet. But now the bomb is ticking really, really hard and really fast. And things are going bad really fast as well. We're already seeing casualties. I mean, we have been seeing casualties already. We have known and learned about casualties in Ukraine, and we're going to know and learn about more. People are resisting with everything, even hammers, Molotov cocktails, all AK-47s. All the citizens who are in fighting shape and condition are actually getting and moving forward towards defending their country. Even the Klitschko brothers, the great heavyweights, one of them, you probably don't know, but one of them, Vitaly, the older brother, is the mayor of Kiev, the capital city of Ukraine. And he's actually right now in full-blown condition and position of soldier. He turned into a soldier, like the president, like his brother, like everybody else, like most people, to fight the Russians off. Pretty much, they declared to the world, to most of the main news companies or networks, that he has no choice, unfortunately, but to be ready to move forward and die. So the former president of Ukraine said the same thing. So now you have people resisting Russian invasion because, straightforward, to put it plainly and clear, I mean, they don't want to be part of Russia. It is obvious that they want to keep on being Ukraine. And this is what Mr. Putin cannot fathom. This totalitarian leader that did his best to present himself to the world as just a strong leader, not a dictator, all of a sudden did something recently very similar to what Hitler did back in 1939 when he invaded Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenlands, because the Sudetenlands in Czechoslovakia back then, there were German people of German ethnicity, not exactly because there's no such thing as one German ethnicity. Germany is comprised of many peoples. If you think about that, all of Europe is connected. I mean, Germans, people from the Germanic areas, different Germanic tribes moved all over to Italy, to Spain, to France, to Britain. So all those peoples are connected. You don't have a specific area right now in Germany that is called the land of the Visigoths, or the land of the Teutons, etc., etc. No, and those are just two groups to name out of many that comprise or conform what is the group of German ethnicities. But Hitler decided that back in 1939 it was unfair, according to him, and his totalitarian crazy agenda, that some people living in another country will have their main language as German as a main language, and they will be part of another country. So he decided to invade Czechoslovakia and take over. And then he decided to do the same with other Germanic peoples of German-speaking peoples in Poland. And so he toppled the Polish regime. And back then, when he was an ally with Stalin, the nefarious leader, second leader of the Soviet Union, they split Poland in two parts. One part belonged to, was occupied by Germany, and the other part by the Soviet Union, commanded by Stalin, who, by the way, also thought that it was a great idea to just go and invade Finland. This is a fact that lots of people actually don't get into, and it's very important to remind them that the Soviet Union actually invaded Finland and committed tremendous war crimes over there, because they thought that they were rightfully doing so, since back in the day, again, the 9th century and so forth, and even before, Vikings from Finland went over and moved over into what is now known as Russian, Belarusian, and Ukrainian territory and populated those territories. So hence, the Russian dictator back then, the Soviet dictator, forgive me, I was talking about Russia and Soviet Union before, so I gotta be, I gotta live up to what I'm saying, to my words. And so the Soviet dictator thought that he was in his rightful position. It was right for him, and he had all the right to just go and invade Finland. And that was an atrocious chapter of World War II that, it's not very spoken of today. That people don't talk about it today a lot. Because of many reasons, propaganda, the way history was written, the fact that, Stalin eventually ended up on the side of the winners because Hitler broke his pact and his agreement with Stalin and invaded the Soviet Union. It was actually one of the most tremendously horrible events warfare history in the history of humanity, and we all know how that ended. Eventually, the Nazi regime was toppled, World War II ended, first with the Nazi regime fall, and eventually now it's with after the two atomic bombs were thrown by the Enola Gay, the American plane, on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and that was the end of it. And the New World Order was established. And in that New World Order, the Cold War started. And in that time, of course, somebody like the father of the Klitschko brothers, was a military officer in the Ukrainian army, in the Soviet army, and he saw first the Soviet Union as the place he would have to stand for. Eventually, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, things changed. Look at what his son is now thinking and saying. They want a democratic and free Ukraine. They don't want a Ukraine that will be ruled by somebody who will just be responding to Vladimir Putin's wishes, the autocrat leader of the Russian Federation or the Russian country. So now what we have is that Russia, not Russia, there's lots of protests all over the country, especially in Moscow, and people are being incarcerated. So tell me, where's the democracy? There's no such thing as a democracy in Russia. We're talking about, and we cannot talk exactly about a dictatorship. We're talking about an oligarchy, an autocracy led by Putin, who's supported by other oligarchs. And they're moving forward to take different parts that they want to incorporate to Russia. And it's more, it goes beyond the idea of incorporating territory, because Russia is an immense country. Of course, most of it is the frozen Siberian desert. But still, they're trying to move more towards the West, because in Putin's mind, the problem is that he sees a threat from NATO. And he sees that with the incorporation, if that should have that happen, the incorporation of Ukraine into the NATO alliance, he will feel that his power, his position as an autocrat, his form of government will be more under threat by the free and democratic republics of the West. Let's put it that way so we can all understand that. So that's a problem right now. What you see and why Putin is invading. You heard it all. You heard that he's an autocrat, that he's conducting an evil war operation against Ukraine, and he's invading. And yes, you can say it's a terrible decision by a person who's an autocrat and who eventually will decide in a way that it's not going to be what most of his population, his country's population, will agree with. But that's not what he cares about. He cares about what he thinks he's doing, and he thinks he's doing the right thing. He thinks he's actually expanding the Russian Federation. He's projected towards not creating a new Soviet Union. He's projected towards creating a stronger Russia again. His idea is not about creating another Soviet Union, and this is what many analysts and journalists and pundits and politicians and world leaders have wrong. That's not what he's trying to do. What he's trying to do is to expand, leaving territory for Russian-speaking people, the way Hitler tried to do when Germany back in the early days of World War II, and eventually failed. And Putin must fail in his task too. He must be brought to senses by two ways. There's no other way. Either you talk him into senses, which is by today's standards for most leaders almost impossible, or you just go and try to block him from keeping on moving forward into Ukraine, which he has done now. He's finding fierce resistance from the different parts and different parts of populations strongly established in bunkers and in trenches in different parts of Ukraine, specifically in Kiev. The capital city is the main focus and point of the war right now. And what you have to understand is that right now when we speak, there's a war going on and people are living under a state of uncertainty, because that's what war brings you. For both sides, the invading side, in this case Putin, and his almost almighty army, is one of the most powerful. He has one of the most powerful armies in the world. And on the other side, which is trying to hold off the Russians or the Russian army so they won't be occupied. Just to give you an idea of what's going on and how things are burning bad right now in Ukraine. Russia, the Russian army, Putin's army, already has control of Chernobyl. Chernobyl was the site of a big nuclear disaster back in 1986, and it's still a place that is isolated. So the world is very concerned about what Putin and his army could do or will be up to being there occupying Chernobyl. Chernobyl is within the confines of the Ukrainian territory. They're part of Ukraine. And that's a big problem. That's a big concern for the whole world. But the main concern is to see for how long Kiev, the capital city of Ukraine, will be able to hold on to their horses and to keep on fighting. So the Western world, NATO, and all the free peoples of the world have two choices now. Either one, moving forward with more aggressive diplomatic actions, and I'm going to tell you about that in a bit, and two, just go into it full-blown and decide to go to war. Probably not declaring war to Russia, but sending troops, soldiers, weapons. They were asking to the members of the Ukrainian government, who are now in resistance mode, where they're now actually packing weapons, shooting Russian soldiers, shooting rockets, throwing grenades at the Russian soldiers, and killing them, and waiting for them to be attacked lethally, and perhaps, and for sure knowing that their lives are on the line. They might not be alive tomorrow, or from here to a week, or a couple of days, who knows? What they're asking, for example, the U.S. government was offering them right out. They said, we're going to pick you up and we're going to move the whole Ukrainian government to another part. The way that back in World War II, when Germany occupied France, the British, actually, Winston Churchill, offered to the French government, and they did move them from France, all the way from Paris, all the way to England, and they created a parallel government. The Pétain government was a government, the puppet government that Hitler established back then during World War II in Germany. So Germany will have a tight grip on France, occupied France, which was occupied from in between the 40s all the way to 44 and the end of the war. I mean, 44 it was liberated, of course. And the other government, the de Gaulle government, de Gaulle, who was the guy who was the leader eventually of the French resistance from England, operated from England. But in this case, the situation is different. We don't have a World War III yet situation, although we could move forward towards something like that, which would be really, really bad. But what we have is a tremendous problem right now that can actually trigger other problems. Not only will affect everyone. So now let me talk about what I said before, the economic sanctions. There's a world system called SWIFT. That world system is the one that regulates and controls the operation, financial transactions between countries. One of the proposals was to cut Russia from the SWIFT system. The problem with that will be that we should already have a structure by which we can find the transportation or the commercialization of gas and other products that Russia is a primary exporter of already solved. If we don't have that, we know one thing that's going to happen, and we don't have it. Make no mistake, we don't have it. One thing that is going to happen, it's going to happen for sure, is that prices, and we are seeing it, we're experiencing it already at the pumps, gas prices are going to skyrocket all the way to something like, just imagine paying, I don't know, $50, $56, $60 a gallon, which could happen. Gas prices are going to go up all the way. Electric prices are going to go up all the way. So products prices are going to go up all the way. When commodities prices go up, all the final products are going to be way more expensive. So just to give you one example, the United States of America is going through the worst inflationary process right now of the past 30, it was a month ago now, it's from the past 40 years. In 40 years, we haven't experienced an inflation such as the one that we're experiencing right now. And that's repercuting all over and resounding all over the world. So just imagine, right now, for example, places like those stores where we could buy items at $1, and pretty much all of them. Now you can no longer do that. You have some items that you can still buy them at $1, but most of them are in between $1 with 25 cents all the way to $3, $5, $10, etc., etc. Why did those chains of commerces, of businesses, had to do that or had to resort to that? Because if not, they couldn't keep their doors open. Now, just think about this situation. We are coming out, not yet, but turning the COVID-19 pandemic situation into an endemic situation. What is that, for those of you who don't know? When there is a pandemic, the situation is very grave and direct, as if what dire as it was. We came out with the vaccines, and now the health problem will turn endemic, which means that we're going to get used to live with COVID-19. We're not going to kick COVID-19 out of the world, and that will be it. It's just that COVID-19 will become, or is becoming already, more like a flu, more like, I don't know, any given perennial health problem that affects us all, on yearly basis. So there are going to be seasons, there are going to be times where we're going to have to take the proper precautions. You're going to have to get vaccinated. You're going to have to take some measures, but it's not going to be as bad as it was first in 2020, when we didn't really know how to counterattack this virus. With the vaccine in hand now, all of the things that we know, and other medicines being developed, we are going to eventually have that under control. But of course, we're not going to come out of a financial crisis right away. When a financial crisis erupts, it takes us more than you think it takes us to come out of it. And now, right after the COVID-19 situation, we have this Russia, Vladimir Putin-led Russia invading Ukraine and creating another possibly to be a catastrophic situation, especially in Europe. And make no mistake, not only Eastern Europe, but the whole of Europe, and that will have repercussions all over the world. It might help in the short term some countries that are not exactly on the democratic side of things for a little bit, because of the price of oil going up, because of the gas prices going up and other commodities going up. But still, you know how it is. Eventually, those countries that have less freedom are the ones whose people suffer the most. Forget about the bureaucrats, about the oligarchs, about the autocrats that are on top of those countries, that are leading those countries. Let's think about the people. So one of the things that came up to mind to the Western powers when it was about knocking Russia out of the SWIFT system. Again, the SWIFT system is the financial system by which countries do their exchanges, their financial exchanges, by which the countries commerce with each other. You know, they buy and sell things by this system called SWIFT. But if you knock Russia out of the system, the first ones who are going to be gravely affected are the Russian people. So there are being under consideration many other options. There are being held many other options are being held under considerations. Many of them about direct action against Putin, of course, and it's happening right now as we speak. As I speak and as we go live with this podcast, there are cyber attacks being conducted against Russia, against the Russian center of commands. So many things are happening that I know about, and I cannot exactly tell you because that will compromise operations that are more under the water than, on the clear side. And it's obvious something that always happens when we're in war times, and that you have to know. There are many things that you're going to hear and see and listen about in news shows and in mainstream media that are going to confound you, are going to put you a little bit in the dark and thinking, so what do we do now? Well, let me tell you, there's more going on than what you know. There's more going on than what I'm telling you right now. There are things that I cannot tell you, but there are things that I know for sure that I cannot tell you, that I can tell you, is that there has to be a way out as soon as possible of this situation. Just remember that Russia was conducting war actions against Ukraine since a while ago. Russia has been conducting bellic aggressive actions since 2008. Then in 2014, the annexation of Crimea and Ukraine by the Vladimir Putin regime. And now this full-scale war against the country, which is pretty much seen as a takeover, and how can you see it any other ways? There hasn't been a plebiscite, like a voting thing in which the people of Ukraine had said that they want to be Russian before instead of being Ukrainian. If anything, it's all the opposite. Even many of those who are Russian, or most of those who are Russian-speaking people, but are Ukrainians, want to remain Ukrainian, wants to keep the state of things the way they were since 1991, when Ukraine was reborn and turned into a more democratic, with many problems, corruption included, and probably being one of the main ones. But still, turned into a democratic country. They don't want to be part of an autocracy. They don't want to be controlled by Russia. And this is a problem that Putin has. In his mind, in his spirit and heart, he sees Ukraine as part of the Soviet Union. If Belarus, also make no mistake, will have a government that will be similar to the one of Ukraine, Putin will have moved in even faster than the way he's moving into Ukraine, because he sees Belarus as a key satellite state ally. He still sees a little bit of the Soviet Union, a reminiscence of the Soviet Union in that country. Although, again, he doesn't want to recreate the Soviet Union. He wants to have a strong Russia and to push NATO as far as he can from Eastern Europe. So that's what NATO and the Western powers have to consider right now. Do we push forward? Do we move in? Do we actually face Putin right now before he either A, takes over Ukraine, or installs a puppet government in Ukraine, that it will be a Russian-friendly government, and we will be forgetting. In that case, we will not have the chance to grant Ukraine full access to NATO, make him a full member of NATO? Or do we actually push forward with harsher sanctions that will cut Russia from the world commerce system? Those are the two choices that are being analyzed and contemplated and considered right now as we speak. So, it has been a long podcast. pretty much for a while. I guess that we've been around for like half an hour. I will try to bring up more information, more podcasts. Now I will have to leave you guys because I have to report in other languages and for other news branches, outlets. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And of course, I will be able to answer without any problem. If there's no answer to a question, I will just be blatantly honest and say there's no answer to this question. But mostly, I think that we can get pretty fair answers to all of your questions. Yeah, they're asking me about the UFO thing because I caught a UFO in camera. I've been going through all the perennial process of clarifying that the images were absolutely unique and, of course, strange, and that such flying device or ship could not be identified. And I'm almost there. I'm already there. Now I have to produce a video and a document that will be for the trademark and registering purposes. And then once that is done, I'm going to upload that in my YouTube channel, Epic News, where this video will also be, this live video, and here at Facebook and in other social media platforms. Well, thank you very much, all of you. This is Marcelo Palermo, war and combat correspondent, international conflicts expert, and analyst. And of course, I appreciate all of you being here. Check it out later again. This video is going to be uploaded on Facebook. The live feeding's finishing right now, but you're going to be able to see it again and again whenever you need some answers to your questions. And again, answer your questions. También pueden preguntar en castellano o en otros idiomas. I'll try to be as crystal clear as possible. Thank you very much for being with me. You all have a great night.